Hey friends! Welcome to Storytelling Podcast, and today we have a special episode. In this video, you'll hear 10 of the most incredible stories shared by our subscribers. Each one is unique and captivating in its own way. Get comfortable. It's going to be interesting. Let's begin. First story. My name is Michael, and I never thought I'd find myself working side by side with my mother-in-law, Linda. Yet here we are at the edge of an old family vineyard in sunny California, ready to breathe new life into this neglected place. Linda, my wife Sarah's mother, had always been a challenging person. Our relationship had been strained from the moment we first met, but Sarah insisted that working together on the vineyard would help us bond. I was skeptical, but for my wife's sake, I was willing to try. The vineyard was in a sorry state. Years of neglect had taken their toll. Overgrown rows, broken trellises, and a dilapidated barn. But beneath all the chaos, I saw potential. With the right care and hard work, we could revive this place and perhaps even mend our relationship. The first days of work were grueling. Linda and I toiled under the scorching California sun, pulling weeds, fixing trellises, and getting the barn in order. Conversation was sparse and awkward, but gradually the ice began to thaw. Over shared lunches in the shade of an old oak tree, we began to share stories and memories. I learned about Sarah's childhood and Linda's dreams for her daughter. She told me about her late husband and how much she missed him. For the first time, I saw her not just as a stern mother-in-law, but as a person with her own hopes, fears, and regrets. As the weeks went by, the vineyard began to transform. Green shoots of grapevines wound their way up the repaired trellises, and the barn became functional once more. But it wasn't just the vineyard that was changing. Linda and I were growing closer, our conversations more relaxed and friendly. Sarah was thrilled with our progress, both on the vineyard and in our relationship. Yet beneath the surface of our growing friendship, something unexpected was brewing. Casual touches, lingering glances, and playful comments began to take on a new tone. I tried to ignore the growing tension between us, chalking it up to the long hours spent together under the hot sun. But with each passing day, it became harder to deny the attraction we were both beginning to feel. One evening, as we stayed late tying up grapevines, our hands accidentally brushed. A spark passed between us, and for a moment, time stood still. We froze, staring into each other's eyes, unable to look away. In that instant, I realized our growing closeness was about to cross a dangerous line. The question was, would we have the strength to resist this forbidden attraction? As summer gradually faded into fall, Linda and I found ourselves spending more and more time at the vineyard. Our combined efforts were bearing fruit. The grapes were ripening on the vines, and the barn had transformed into a proper wine cellar. But it wasn't just the vineyard that was blossoming. Our relationship was too. Those awkward, tense first days were a distant memory. Now we eagerly anticipated our morning meetings over coffee, discussing the day's plans and sharing stories from our lives. Linda told me about her youth, her travels through Europe, and her passion for art. I shared my dreams of writing and of building a life with Sarah. Our work at the vineyard became a sort of dance. We moved in unison, anticipating each other's needs without words. Casual touches became more frequent and daring, glances more meaningful. The tension between us grew with each passing day, like a grapevine reaching for the sun. Sarah, consumed by her work in the city, seemed oblivious to the shift in our relationship. She was thrilled with our progress at the vineyard and how her mother and I had grown closer. I felt a pang of guilt for my growing feelings for Linda, but I couldn't bring myself to pull away. One day, as we were working late, a sudden downpour caught us by surprise. We took shelter in the barn, laughing and shaking off the rain. In the dim light of the single bulb, our eyes met, and the laughter faded. The air between us crackled with tension, and I felt an overwhelming urge to touch her, to kiss her. As if reading my thoughts, Linda stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Her hand slid up my chest, and I held my breath. "We shouldn't," I whispered, but my words sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. She smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "But we want to," she whispered back. In that moment, the last of my self-control crumbled. I pulled her to me, our lips meeting in a passionate kiss. Hands explored, clothes fell to the floor, and we lost ourselves in a whirlwind of forbidden desire. On the hard wooden floor of the barn, to the accompaniment of the rain and rumbling thunder, we made love with a desperate, frenzied passion. Later, lying in each other's arms, we were silent, stunned by what had transpired. The reality of our actions began to sink in, along with guilt and fear of the consequences. We agreed it couldn't happen again, that it was a one-time mistake. But even then, deep down, we both knew it was only the beginning. After that night in the barn, Linda and I tried to act as if nothing had happened. We threw ourselves into work at the vineyard, attempting to ignore the growing tension between us. But stolen glances and accidental touches told a different story. Beneath the surface, barely restrained emotions were simmering. Our secret meetings began almost by accident. Lingering late at the vineyard, a stolen kiss in the shadows of the barn, a walk in the nearby woods that turned into something more. Each time, we swore it would be the last, that we had to put an end to this madness. But our attraction to each other was too strong to resist. I was torn between guilt and passion. I loved Sarah, she was my wife, and the center of my world. But with Linda, I felt a connection I couldn't explain, as if she understood parts of me I didn't even know existed. Our trysts were filled with passion and desperation, as if we were trying to steal every moment we could from fate, knowing it couldn't last forever. Sarah began to notice changes in my behavior. I became more distracted, often staying late at the vineyard and avoiding her questions about how the work was progressing. She joked that I was spending more time with her mother than with her, not realizing how close she was to the truth. Linda seemed to struggle less with guilt over our affair. She said life was too short to deny ourselves what made us happy, that sometimes you had to take risks for love. I wanted to share her confidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were balancing on the edge of a precipice. Our liaisons became more reckless. Stolen moments in the vineyard, secret meetings at a hotel in the next town over. It was as if we were daring fate to catch us. And one day, our worst fears came true. Sarah arrived at the vineyard unexpectedly, intending to surprise Linda and me. Instead, she found us together in the barn, locked in an embrace. Shock, pain, and fury mingled in her eyes. She turned and ran before we could say a word, slamming the door with such force that the walls shook. Linda and I broke apart, breathing heavily, caught off guard and awash with guilt. The reality of our actions had finally caught up with us, and we knew we had to face the consequences. With heavy hearts, we left the vineyard and headed home, knowing the most difficult conversation of our lives awaited us. The drive home felt like a march to the gallows. Linda was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the car window with an unreadable expression. My head was buzzing with thoughts and guilt as I tried to find the words to explain our behavior. When we entered the house, Sarah was waiting for us in the living room, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, but they burned with anger. She looked at us and shook her head, unable to find the words. "How could you?" she finally said, looking at Linda. "My own mother, I trusted you." Her voice trembled with emotion, and I felt the stab of guilt even more acutely. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," Linda began, but Sarah cut her off with a wave of her hand. "Don't! I don't want to hear your excuses. I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" Her gaze darted between us, waiting for an answer. I sighed, realizing it was time to come clean. "A few months," I said quietly. "It just happened. We didn't plan it, but—" "But what? You couldn't resist!" Sarah snapped. "You decided your desires were more important than our marriage, our family." "No, of course not," I argued, taking a step towards her. "I love you, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you. I'm so sorry." To my surprise, Linda laughed, a cold, harsh laugh that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, stop it, Michael. Enough with the pretense. It's time to tell the truth." Sarah and I stared at her, confused. "The truth?" Sarah asked. "What are you talking about?" Linda straightened, a look of triumph in her eyes. "The truth is, this was my plan all along, to seduce Michael, to destroy your marriage. You deserve better, Sarah. He was never good enough for you." My mind reeled, refusing to comprehend what I was hearing. This couldn't be true. Our feelings, our connection, it couldn't have been part of some elaborate scheme. But as I looked at Linda, I saw only cold determination in her eyes. Sarah was stunned, her eyes filling with tears. "How could you?" she whispered. "I thought you loved me, Mom. How could you manipulate and betray me like this?" Linda shrugged, seemingly unperturbed. "I did what I thought was best for you, dear. Michael isn't the man you should have married. I always knew that. I just needed to make you see it." I stood there, numb with shock and betrayal. The woman I thought was my soulmate, whom I trusted, had been a master manipulator all along. Our connection, our shared moments, it had all been part of her cruel plan. I felt like a fool for allowing myself to be caught in her web. Sarah turned to me, her eyes filled with pain. "And you, Michael? Were you in on this? Did you plan this with her from the start?" "No!" I exclaimed, desperate for her to believe me. "I swear I had no idea. I thought Linda and I had something real. I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah. Please, you have to believe me." But I could see the doubt in her eyes. And I couldn't blame her. How could she trust me after everything I'd done? I had betrayed her trust, shattered our family. And for what? A fleeting affair and a handful of lies? Linda watched our exchange with a smug smile. "Well, I suppose my work here is done. See you around, dear." She turned to leave, but Sarah stopped her. "No, Mom, you don't get to just walk away after what you've done. I can't forgive you, not now, maybe not ever. You've destroyed our relationship, our family, and for what? Some twisted revenge?" Sarah's voice shook with emotion. Linda merely shrugged. "Call it what you will. I did what I had to do. I hope one day you'll understand. Goodbye, Sarah. Good luck." With those words, she walked out the door, leaving our shattered family behind. The aftermath of the revelation was as devastating as the lie itself. Sarah couldn't forgive me for my betrayal, and I couldn't forgive myself for falling prey to Linda's manipulations. Our marriage, once seemingly unbreakable, crumbled under the weight of secrets and deception. The divorce was a painful but necessary process. Sarah couldn't look at me without tears and anger, and I knew I couldn't give her the life she deserved. We divided our assets and tried to move on, but sharing our mutual pain was impossible. The vineyard, once a symbol of new beginnings and hope, now stood as a painful reminder of my infidelity. I couldn't bring myself to go back there, every corner tainted with memories of my sins. Eventually, I sold it, splitting the proceeds with Sarah. It felt like a final attempt at atonement, however small. Linda disappeared from our lives as suddenly as she had entered. Last I heard, she had moved to Europe, leaving a trail of broken relationships and shattered hearts in her wake. Sometimes I wondered if she regretted what she had done, if she realized the extent of the damage she had caused. But deep down, I knew the answer to those questions would bring me no peace. It took years to heal the wounds and rebuild some semblance of a normal life. I worked on becoming a better version of myself and slowly rebuilt a friendly relationship with Sarah. We would never be together again, but I hoped that one day we could trust each other again as friends. Looking back, I realize how destructive the power of lies and manipulation can be. I had allowed myself to be trapped by a forbidden passion, and it had cost me everything. But I also learned the power of forgiveness, forgiving others and myself. It was a long and difficult journey, but I knew I had to take it to move forward. Second story. I still can't believe that Catherine and I actually moved to America. It was our long-held dream, and now, finally, it has come true. Of course, starting a new life in an unfamiliar country is not easy, but we are full of enthusiasm. For the first time, we stayed with Catherine's mom, Evelyn. She lives in a charming cottage in a quiet, green neighborhood. The house is spacious and cozy, with a large garden where it's so nice to spend time. "Stay with me as long as you need, my dears," Evelyn said, hugging us on the doorstep. "You know how happy I am that you're here." Catherine and I are very grateful to her for her hospitality. It's great that we have a place to live at first, while we look for work and settle in. My mother-in-law is the nicest woman, always ready to support and help. Despite the move and the hustle and bustle, my wife and I try to maintain a positive attitude. In the evenings, we walk around the new neighborhood, getting to know the locals. They are friendly and welcoming, which is pleasing. Having settled in with Evelyn, Catherine and I gradually blend into the measured home life. While my wife is busy looking for a job, I try to be helpful around the house. I especially enjoy helping my mother-in-law in the garden. There is always something to do there. "Thank you, Michael." Evelyn smiles when I once again volunteer to help with the beds or lawn. "With you, any work gets done twice as fast." We often talk to her about life, share stories, and joke. My mother-in-law and I discovered quite a few common interests that I had never suspected before. For example, a love of old movies and jazz music. "Wow, you like Frank Sinatra too?" I asked in surprise when Evelyn was humming "Fly Me to the Moon" while cooking dinner. "Of course! I even used to go dancing to him once," she winked back. I find it easy and interesting to communicate with my mother-in-law. Sometimes she and I can chat for hours on end while Catherine is busy with her own things. It's nice that such a warm, trusting relationship has developed between us. Although sometimes I am visited by strange thoughts that I immediately push away. That day, Catherine left for the city early in the morning. She had several interviews scheduled. My mother-in-law and I were left alone at home. Evelyn started baking an apple pie and called me to help. We were puttering around the kitchen, chatting about nothing. At one point, reaching for the flour, I accidentally touched Evelyn with my hand. That fleeting touch sent an electric shock through my body. "Oh, sorry," I said in embarrassment, looking away. "It's okay," Evelyn replied softly. But there was something in her gaze that made me catch my breath. We suddenly fell silent, looking at each other. The tension between us became almost palpable. As if in a dream, I saw every freckle on her slightly flushed cheeks, felt the teasing scent of her perfume. My heart was pounding wildly. "Evelyn, I began, not knowing what I wanted to say. But my mother-in-law put her finger to my lips and whispered, "Shh, don't say anything, just kiss me." And I kissed her, passionately, greedily, as if I had been waiting for this moment for an eternity. Our hands roamed each other's bodies, exploring, caressing. It was madness, but such sweet madness. From that day on, something forbidden and secret began between us. We both knew we shouldn't allow ourselves to do this. But how can you command your heart? Our secret affair with Evelyn continued. We met in snatches when Catherine wasn't home. We locked ourselves in her room, made love, whispering sweet nothings to each other. For a while, we forgot about everything in the world. But as soon as my wife returned, we were both overwhelmed with guilt. We avoided looking each other in the eye, afraid of giving ourselves away with a casual glance or gesture, and even more afraid to look at Catherine. My beloved wife, suspecting nothing, was still affectionate with me. She made plans for the future, shared her little joys. She hugged me so sincerely, with such love, and this only made me feel worse. "How's Mom doing? You two have been spending so much time together," Catherine asked over dinner one day. "It's all good," I squeezed out, looking down. "I'm just helping her around the house while you're busy." Then Catherine smiled and stroked my hand. "You're so caring. Thank you for helping Mom out." Those words burned like fire. If only she knew what her mother and I were really doing. Then she definitely wouldn't be thanking me. I felt painfully ashamed in front of my wife. The longer my affair with Evelyn continued, the more I realized that it couldn't go on like this. We risked destroying our family and hurting someone close to us. But how do you find the strength to end something that brings so much forbidden pleasure? One evening when Catherine went to visit new friends, Evelyn and I were alone again. We sat in the living room, sipping wine and absently gazing at the fire in the fireplace. We were both silent, lost in unhappy thoughts. "Michael, this can't go on," Evelyn suddenly said quietly, breaking the silence. "What's happening between us? It's not right." I sighed heavily. I knew this conversation was long overdue, but I was still unprepared. "You're right. We shouldn't be doing this to Catherine," I replied, looking my mother-in-law in the eye. "She doesn't deserve this betrayal." "Exactly. As much as I want to be with you, this relationship is impossible." Evelyn smiled sadly. "We need to end this here and now before it's too late." We talked for a long time that night, pouring our hearts out to each other. We admitted that our feelings were sincere and deep. But for Catherine's happiness, we would have to bury them within ourselves. "Our secret will die with us," Evelyn whispered in my ear during our last farewell kiss. From that day on, my mother-in-law and I returned to our former, respectful relationship, as if nothing had happened. We doubled our efforts to take care of the house, helping Catherine and supporting her in everything. My wife became the center of my universe again. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I remember my affair with Evelyn and mourn what might have been. But I immediately pull myself together. I have a loving wife and hope for a happy future in a new country. I can't destroy that. One thing I'm sure of. No matter what happens in the future, my mother-in-law and I will keep our secret. What was forbidden between us will forever remain hidden from prying eyes. This burden of memories we will carry through life in silence, not allowing it to break Catherine's heart. After a while, our family moved into our own home. Life fell into a familiar groove, filled with new events and concerns. We often visit Evelyn, surrounding her with attention and love. But to everyone except the two of us, our relationship is a model of understanding between son-in-law and mother-in-law, and may it always be so. Third story. Antarctica is an amazing place, full of mysteries and enigmas. After 6 months of intense work as part of a scientific expedition, I, Adam Wilson, was finally returning home. The anticipation of reuniting with my family and getting back to my usual way of life filled me with joy and impatience. The door to our cozy suburban Chicago home was opened by Victoria, my mother-in-law. With open arms and a radiant smile, she embraced me warmly. Her presence always gave a feeling of homely warmth and care. "Adam, dear, welcome back," she exclaimed, helping me take off my jacket. "How glad I am to see you. You must be very tired from the trip. Come on in, I've prepared your favorite dishes." The aroma of home-cooked food enveloped me, and I felt myself relax for the first time in a long while. Victoria took me by the arm and led me into the living room, where a festive table was already set. "Where's Olivia?" I asked, looking around for my wife. "Oh, honey, you know our hard worker," sighed Victoria, "staying late at work as usual, but she promised to get free as soon as possible and join us. In the meantime, tell me, how are you in the land of eternal frost? I was so worried about you all these months." We sat down on the couch, and I began my story about Antarctica, about the amazing scientific discoveries and the indescribable feelings of being at the edge of the world. Victoria listened attentively, now and then, asking questions and gasping in the right places. Her genuine interest warmed my soul. We didn't notice how several hours flew by in conversation. Olivia still wasn't back, and Victoria suggested having dinner without her. We continued our chat at the table, recalling Olivia's childhood, family celebrations, and funny incidents. Looking at Victoria, I suddenly realized that I had never noticed before what a beautiful woman she was. Age hadn't spoiled her at all, only added charm and allure. Her eyes radiated warmth and kindness, and her smile could light up the gloomiest day. We stayed up late into the night. Olivia never showed up, citing an urgent project. I thanked Victoria for a wonderful evening and went to bed in the guest bedroom. I didn't want to go to bed without my wife. As I was falling asleep, I caught myself thinking that I had been admiring my mother-in-law all evening and marveling at her intelligence, charm, and sensitivity. This discovery both surprised and embarrassed me. Could it be that over the years of marriage, I had become closer to my wife's mother than to my wife herself? With this ambiguous thought, I drifted off to sleep, not yet suspecting what a whirlpool of events was waiting for me ahead. The next few days turned into a real test for my feelings and conscience. Olivia was immersed in work, coming home after midnight and sometimes not spending the night at home at all. Our communication was reduced to rare exchanges of a couple of phrases in the mornings and monosyllabic phone conversations. But Victoria literally surrounded me with care and attention. She cooked amazing breakfasts, took an interest in my affairs, offered help with everyday matters. We talked a lot, walked in the park, went shopping. With each day, I admired this amazing woman more and more and was drawn to her company. One evening, Victoria invited me to dinner, promising to prepare something special. Olivia was delayed at work once again, and I gladly accepted my mother-in-law's invitation. We conjured together in the kitchen, joked, shared recipes. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and a special kind of closeness. Over a glass of wine after dinner, our eyes met, and a spark passed between us. Victoria's hand casually touched my knee, and a shiver ran through my body. I suddenly realized clearly that I felt more than just filial feelings for her. It was attraction, passion, a desire to possess her. "Adam, I don't know how to say this," Victoria whispered, lowering her eyes. "You've become a very close person to me over these days. I understand that it's wrong, but I can't fight my feelings." "Victoria, I feel it too," I exhaled, covering her hand with mine. "You're an amazing, beautiful woman. With you, I feel alive and needed, but we can't—" I know, she interrupted, putting a finger to my lips. but right now, I just want to be with you, even if only for one night, and tomorrow, come what may." And our lips merged in a hot, passionate kiss. We kissed like the possessed, tearing clothes off each other. Passion eclipsed reason, pushing to the back of my mind thoughts about the wrongness of what was happening. There were only the two of us left, intertwined in an embrace on the soft carpet of the living room. In the morning, I woke up in Victoria's bed, naked and empty. What happened at night seemed like a dream, beautiful and frightening at the same time. Victoria was sleeping beside me, her hair spread out on the pillow, a slight smile playing on her lips. I carefully slipped out from under the blanket, got dressed, and left the room. I needed to think everything over, to decide how to live on. One thing was clear: our affair must not become public knowledge. Too much was at stake. The next few weeks turned into a real hell for my conscience. Victoria and I continued our secret meetings, snatching minutes of intimacy when Olivia wasn't home. Passion obscured the voice of reason, making us forget about moral principles and marital duty. I was torn between two women, realizing that my behavior was unacceptable and cruel to both of them. Olivia, even if absorbed in work, was still my wife, my faithful life partner. And Victoria, she had become a breath of fresh air for me, a source of tenderness and understanding, which were so lacking in my marriage. Pangs of conscience tormented me, giving me no peace day or night. I felt like the last scoundrel, deceiving the two people closest to me. But I couldn't stop this relationship anymore. I was too deeply mired in the web of passion and forbidden feelings. One day, Victoria and I stayed late in a small restaurant on the outskirts of town. Absorbed in each other, we didn't notice how time flew by. After paying the bill, I drove Victoria home, anticipating another night of love. Pulling up to the house, I saw Olivia's car parked and felt a chill. She shouldn't have come back so early. Thinking frantically, I dropped Victoria off a block away and asked her to wait while I sorted things out with my wife. Only Olivia met me on the doorstep, full of righteous anger. In her hands, she clutched my phone, forgotten on the hallway table. "Well, how do you explain this?" she hissed, shoving the screen with screenshots of the correspondence in my face. "I love you. I miss you. I can't wait for our meeting. And to my own mother." I stood there thunderstruck. All my carefully constructed plans and excuses crumbled like a house of cards. Olivia knew. And by her eyes burning with rage, I understood there would be no forgiveness for me. "How could you? How could you both do this to me?" she screamed, not holding back her tears. "My husband and my mother, you disgust me." "Olivia, listen, I didn't mean to. It just—" I began, but she didn't let me finish. "Shut up! I don't want to hear anything. Get out of my house, out of my life, and you can take that slut with you. I can't stand the sight of you." Olivia burst into sobs, her whole body shaking. Broken and destroyed, I silently left the house, throwing a couple of things into a bag. Victoria was waiting for me on the corner, shivering from the evening chill. Seeing my face, she understood everything without words. "She found out, didn't she?" Victoria asked quietly, pressing against me. "What's going to happen now?" "I don't know," I exhaled wearily. "I'll stay in a hotel for now. We need to give Olivia time to cool off, to think everything over. I love you, Victoria, but Olivia too. How do I make sense of all this?" "Shh." Victoria put a finger to my lips. "Don't think about anything now. Let's go to my place. Everything will look different in the morning." And I, broken and lost, yielded to this spur-of-the-moment decision. Come what may, the main thing is that tonight I won't be left alone with my guilt. The next couple of days we spent holed up in Victoria's small apartment on the other side of town. She took time off work, citing illness, and I cowardly ignored Olivia's calls and messages, not knowing what to say. Our seclusion was like the calm before the storm. We made love, talked about trifles, watched old movies, trying to postpone the inevitable return to reality. But it came on the third day with a demanding knock on the door. Olivia stood on the threshold, pale and haggard. Her eyes were filled with pain mixed with determination, and behind her loomed two burly men in police uniforms. "So here you are," she said through gritted teeth, drilling me with her gaze. "Got yourself nicely set up, I must say." "Olivia, what does all this mean?" I mumbled, bewildered, nodding at the cops. "Why did you bring the police?" "Oh, that's in case you suddenly decide to run away from responsibility," she spat out. Or your tramp thinks of covering for you. I know everything, Adam. About your affair, about the lies, about this miserable hole where you've been hiding like cowardly curs." Her words were so full of hatred and contempt that I physically felt them, like slaps in the face. Victoria appeared from the depths of the apartment, throwing a light robe over her shoulders. Seeing her daughter, she froze, pressing her hands to her chest. "Olivia, my girl, please," she began, but Olivia cut her off sharply. "Shut up! Don't you dare call me your girl after everything you've done! What kind of mother would cheat with her own daughter's husband? You're no longer my mother. You're... Choking with anger, Olivia burst into tears, but she quickly pulled herself together and motioned for the police to approach. "Take him away. I've filed a complaint for infidelity and demand an immediate divorce. The division of property and your further squabbles with this lady are no longer my business." "Olivia, wait, don't do this. Let's talk. We love each other," I cried out desperately, feeling the ground slip from under my feet. "Love? You dare talk about love?" She smiled bitterly. "You betrayed our love the moment you got into bed with my mother. It's over, Adam. Live with it, and I'll start a new life. Without you..." And the police led me away, past Victoria frozen in the doorway, past busy streets, past the future that had recently seemed so cloudless. Ahead loomed long divorce proceedings, division of property, public condemnation. But the most terrifying thing was realizing that I had destroyed with my own hands what I should have cherished and protected: my marriage, my family, and now retribution was inevitable. The divorce was finalized surprisingly quickly. Olivia didn't make a public scene or accusations, although she had every right to do so. We divided the property, sold the house. I didn't object, understanding that I deserved this and much more. Victoria and I rented a small apartment, trying to start life anew. But the old passion, like trust, was gone. Each of us carried a burden of guilt and regret, reminding us hourly of the irreparable mistake. Months passed, one like the other. I immersed myself in work just so I wouldn't have to think and remember. Victoria also went about her business, avoiding meeting me more than necessary. We seemed to be serving a sentence in voluntary confinement, forgetting what it was like to live and breathe fully. The news of Olivia's pregnancy caught me off guard. Yes, she had a new man. Yes, formally we had long been strangers. But something tugged at my heart, made me regret my choice. After all, Olivia and I had once dreamed of children, planned a future. This news prompted Victoria and me to have a decisive conversation. In one of the rare moments when we were both at home and in the mood for frankness, she said, "We need to leave, somewhere far away, where no one knows about our past. Start with a clean slate, you know? Otherwise, we'll go crazy with guilt." I nodded, acknowledging her rightness. We needed to break out of this vicious circle of self-flagellation and bitter memories. And a few weeks later, we were packing our suitcases, preparing to move to the other end of the country, to where no one knew us. Just before leaving, I gathered up my courage and dialed Olivia's number. After a long ringtone, she finally answered, clearly surprised by my call. "What do you want, Adam?" she asked wearily. "I thought we'd cleared everything up." "I just wanted to apologize," I said slowly, struggling to find the words. "For everything I've done, for the pain I caused you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but it's important to me that you know I'm sorry, sincerely. And congratulations on the future baby. You're going to be all right, I believe it." Silence reigned on the other end of the line, and then I heard a quiet sob and a barely audible, "Thank you, Adam, really. I wish you happiness too. Despite everything, take care of yourself." The conversation ended, leaving behind a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Now we could leave with a clear conscience. The flight to Seattle was delayed by 2 hours, and Victoria and I spent all that time in silence, each thinking our own thoughts. I watched the people scurrying around the airport with their hopes, worries, and dreams. I wondered how many of them were like us, confused, stumbled, desperately seeking a second chance. When the boarding call came, Victoria squeezed my hand and whispered, "We'll make it. We'll cope. Life is not over. There's still a lot of good things ahead. Remember, like in that song, there's only a moment between the past and the future. It is this that is called life." I smiled through my tears and nodded. Yes, it was time to start living, for real, fully, and meaningfully, and let our happiness be bought at a dear price. It's worth it. With these thoughts, we boarded the plane, leaving behind the stories of our former selves, and ahead waited a new chapter which was yet to be filled, and I believed we would succeed. Fourth story. It was one of those stunning California-style summer weddings that are memorable for a lifetime. Emily and I signed at a picturesque ranch in Napa Valley, surrounded by vineyards and orange groves. The atmosphere was relaxed, close friends, no pomp, all in the spirit of simple American luxury. My new mother-in-law, Carol, Emily's mother, was also present. This 40-year-old beauty at the first glance attracted all men's eyes, dazzling blonde with a chiseled figure of a photo model, long, slender legs, wasp waist, and lush bust. Her luxurious golden curls fell down to her shoulders in a pearly wave, and her large blue eyes shone with a sparkling sparkle. Carol had a magnetic charm and allure that few women possess. When my mother-in-law and I spun in a slow dance after the wedding banquet, I felt her closeness all too clearly. Carol pressed herself against me with her whole body, literally pressing into me with her hips and firm breasts. Her slender silk-clad legs were rubbing against mine in a lewd friction, and her lips were almost close to my ear. "I hope you'll be able to make my dear daughter properly happy," my mother-in-law murmured in her sensual, chesty voice, which sent a hot shiver through my body. "And if anything, I shall always be glad to help quench your boyish ardor." Her tantalizing lips opened expressively, her words sounding more than explicit and promising something unbelievable. I was dumbfounded to meet this fatal beauty and froze. In her eyes openly read the challenge and bold proposal of intimacy. The wedding music suddenly seemed an unnecessary background, and the dance was cut short by an incredible heartbeat. But Carol resolutely took my hand and led me away from the noisy crowd of guests to somewhere more private. Once in a private, secluded room, Carol pushed my back against the wall and greedily planted a kiss on my lips. Her hand slipped under my jacket, pulling me to her waist. "We were made for each other, sweetie," she breathed hoarsely, not breaking the hot embrace. "And you deserve this wedding night with me." I nodded dazedly, powerless to resist her onslaught. Carol's lips covered mine in another lewd kiss. Her eager tongue explored every corner of my mouth, and her hands went under my shirt, shamelessly groping and stroking my breasts. I melted from her fervor, from her unconcealed desire to possess me completely. The next few minutes were a blur. I only vaguely remember the whirlwind of clothes being thrown off and Carol's suppressed moan. And then we, finally naked, shamelessly intertwined in our first forbidden intimacy on the leather sofa. Carol proved to be adept at lovemaking and was not at all shy about openly demonstrating her skills. She generously shared her experience, helped to gain confidence, suggested the most seductive caresses, and how to give a woman true pleasure. These hot lessons of seduction were like a grueling but incredibly sweet marathon, when one pleasure greedily replaced another, and the thirst for carnal intimacy became more and more unbearable. "That's it, my good boy," Carol exhaled shamelessly through the shroud of ecstatic moans of pleasure. "You are such a capable student. Now remember that tantalizing taste forever." When we finally collapsed in sweet exhaustion on the crumpled sheets, my mother-in-law pinched my cheek. "And Emily will never know how I taught you all the tricks and wisdoms of love on our wedding night today. But now you'll be an ace in the sack, just for her." To be perfectly honest, the first few days of married life with Emily had been a major sexual disappointment. My young innocent wife was remarkably inexperienced and even prudishly correct in matters of love. At any attempt to be naked, she was embarrassed and stewed, in no way went to the slightest experiments in bed, preferring always the same routine position. After half an hour of monotonous caresses, Emily began to fall asleep, then shamefully covered herself with the sheet and turned away. Compared to the hot and incredibly lustful Carol, the difference was stark. On the first wedding night, Emily timidly pressed herself against me, all clenched and tucked in, allowing only limited simple caresses. All my attempts to vary the intimacy a little or try something new met with a firm no and lamentations about the sinfulness of such things. I simply couldn't remember Carol's cues and lessons, so stilted and sanctimoniously puritanical was Emily. By the time I was forced out of bed for the third time that night to briefly go freshen up in the bathroom, I was already pissed off by the whole unsatisfying situation. My excited youthful body was eager for full liberation of feelings, longed for real passion, sincere embraces, and loud ecstatic moans. But my young wife simply did not give it to me, every time shy and capriciously pressing her lips. The morning after a nearly sleepless night, when I was once again trying in vain to get Emily to come, Carol suddenly came into the bedroom. I was lying in bed alone, Emily having gone out to make coffee. Carol's tight-fitting dress with the deepest cleavage, luxurious loose hair, and the alluring, intoxicating scent of expensive perfume instantly clouded my mind. My mother-in-law slowly licked her plump lips and winked playfully and teasingly at me. "Perhaps, dear son-in-law, you still need my special help, my years of invaluable experience and all." Since that memorable day, Carol had become not only my official mother-in-law, but also my regular mistress, teaching me more and more of the mysteries of carnal pleasure. While Emily was at home or endlessly shopping with her friends, her lecherous mother came to me for another raucous coitus. Carol was the epitome of pure lust and unbridled passion, the likes of which you couldn't even find on the covers of cult magazines like Playboy. Only she knew how to behave so masterfully in bed, and her shameless moans, lustful screams, and slutty praise time after time excited my lust to the limit. In one of these meetings, when we once again indulged in universal passion on the wrinkled, sweaty sheets, Carol whispered hotly in my ear, "You have no idea, sweetie, how long I dreamed of such an insatiable and enduring lover. Don't spare no effort. Show me at last how well you have learned all my lessons and wisdom." Carol willingly and shamelessly taught me all conceivable and unthinkable, the most unbridled poses, from primitive and simple to the rarest acrobatic etudes. In her performance, even a hot Casanova would have seemed hopelessly impotent. I became an insatiable and completely subject to her lover, lustfully fulfilling all her lustful desires. Of course, I was well aware of the immorality and forbidden sinfulness of what was happening. To enter into an unauthorized relationship with the mother of my own lawful wife, it was clearly beyond all conceivable limits of common decency and marital fidelity. But at the same time, my shameless mother-in-law Carol seemed to me more and more like a true goddess of love, sent by fate itself. She was for me not just an official member of the new family, but a source of incredible, hitherto unexplored sensual and carnal pleasures. It was on her initiative and at her suggestion that I was able to fully liberate myself, finally say goodbye to all complexes and clamps, gain the missing male confidence, and comprehend all possible secrets, all the subtle nuances of ecstatic embraces on the way to the highest intimate bliss. Carol was absolutely right. My irrepressible youthful lust really should have been immediately quenched by the strictest and full program. For the first nights with the naive and too young, Emily left only a burning disappointment and the strongest dissatisfaction. Only with my openly lecherous and incredibly experienced in the affairs of debauchery and sin mother-in-law, I was finally able to enjoy the very essence of intimacy without shyness and any sanctimonious conventions. Therefore, in no case should not underestimate the role and influence of the mother-in-law in the personal, intimate life of the son-in-law. Of course, to enter into such a forbidden and shameful relationship with her is a certain challenge to society itself and going beyond the generally accepted morality and decency. But has true, untainted passion ever recognized any limitations and conventions? For me, Carol was not just a relative by family status, but a priestess of forbidden mysteries, leading to the heights of pleasure. Her experience and passionate nature made me a man capable of giving a woman the ultimate bliss, even if it meant crossing the line. Fifth story. I was behind the wheel of our rented sedan, heading towards a forest resort in Colorado. My wife Carol was dozing off next to me, while her mother Diana sat in the back seat, engrossed in a book. It was Carol's idea to have a family getaway in the heart of nature to strengthen our relationship. Lately, Carol and I had been arguing over trifles, and the atmosphere at home was tense. "Tom, could you drive more carefully? Your sharp maneuvers are making me queasy," Carol grumbled, waking up. "Sorry, honey. I just want to get there faster," I replied in a conciliatory tone, trying to hide my annoyance. "She's never satisfied with anything." "Oh, youth always in a rush," Diana chimed in from the back seat. In our day, we never hurried and just enjoyed the views from the window. I rolled my eyes, but stayed silent. I was always slightly irritated by my mother-in-law's presence with her endless moralizing. But there was no way around it. Diana had been widowed a few years ago, and Carol considered it her duty to take care of her mother. A couple of hours later, we finally arrived at the forest resort and settled into a cozy wooden cottage. It was a picturesque place, mountains covered in lush greenery, a babbling brook nearby, fresh air saturated with the scent of pine. Even my city soul noted the soothing beauty of nature. "So, how about a little walk before dinner?" Carol suggested enthusiastically, unpacking. "The brochure says there's a lovely forest trail leading to a scenic lake." "Maybe we should rest from the road first." I tried to wriggle out. After hours of sitting behind the wheel, the prospect of a horizontal position on the bed was more appealing to me. "Oh no, no more lazing around for you." Carol playfully slapped my shoulder. "Come on, get up. Mom, you're coming with us too, right?" "Of course, darling," Diana readily agreed. "I can't wait to breathe in this wonderful forest air." I had to comply. After all, this was exactly what we came here for, to be together, to reconnect. Half an hour later, we were already walking along a winding path, meandering between age-old pines and spruces. The murmur of the forest stream and the chirping of birds had a calming effect, and I felt the tension of recent weeks gradually receding. Maybe Carol was right, and this was exactly what we needed right now. We had been walking the trail for about an hour, but the lake mentioned in the brochure still hadn't appeared. The sun was gradually sinking towards the horizon, casting long shadows on the green moss. I began to worry. Wandering through an unfamiliar forest in the dark was not appealing. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested, checking the map. "I think we took a wrong turn somewhere. That lake is nowhere to be seen." "Oh no, we've come this far. We have to reach it," Carol stubbornly objected. "It's bound to show up soon." "I'm afraid Tom is right," Diana said sensibly, adjusting her hat. "The sun is setting, and we've already strayed quite a bit from the path. Better not risk it." "See, listen to your mom. She won't steer you wrong." I rejoiced at the support. Carol grimaced but didn't argue. We turned around and headed back the way we came. Only the acclaimed lake still wasn't appearing, and wasn't appearing. Gradually, I began to realize the frightening truth. We seemed to be lost. Around us was nothing but forest, with no hint of the familiar trail. "I think we're going in circles," Diana voiced the common thought, wearily sitting down on a fallen log. "We should have turned back right away, as Tom said." "Well, sorry, the idea sounded so enticing." Carol threw up her hands and turned to me. "Honey, you're better at navigating terrain. Can you find the way?" I twirled the useless map in my hands with doubt. That same brook was gurgling somewhere to the right, and I figured that if we followed it, at least we'd come out somewhere. But Diana could barely move her feet, and there was no more than half an hour left before darkness fell. "Let's rest for now," I suggested, sitting down next to my mother-in-law, "and in the morning we'll look for the road with fresh strength. I don't think we've gone that far." "Spend the night in the woods? Are you crazy?" Carol exploded. "We'll be devoured by wild animals here, or maniacs." I sighed. City life really does not have the best effect on one's sanity. In a calm tone, I explained that we were unlikely to be threatened by maniacs in the middle of a dense forest, and we could escape animals by climbing a tree. Diana listened silently to our argument, and then suddenly said with a bitter smirk, "Your father and I used to love wandering in the woods too, Carol. Ah, youth. It seemed the whole world was at our feet." "Really?" The daughter was surprised. "You never told me about that, Mom." "I guess I was keeping those memories to myself," Diana replied with a sad smile, "to warm myself with their glow in moments of loneliness." I was suddenly pricked by a strange feeling. I never thought that my mother-in-law, always so strict and proper, also had her secrets, her cherished moments. Maybe she's not as much of a grumbler as she wants to appear? This thought made me look at Diana with new eyes. Meanwhile, it had gotten completely dark. Carol climbed onto the lower branch of the nearest spruce, grumbling that a serious conversation awaited us in the morning. Diana and I settled at the foot of the tree, making a kind of bed out of spruce needles. My stomach rumbled with hunger, but there was nothing to be done. We could only wait for dawn, and hoped that this misunderstanding would soon be over. The night turned out to be cool. We lay side by side, wrapped in our jackets, trying to preserve the remnants of warmth. Carol was softly snoring somewhere above, and I couldn't fall asleep, going over the events of this ill-fated day in my head. And to think we had to get lost. "Can't sleep?" Diana suddenly asked quietly, turning to me. "Yeah, so many thoughts in my head," I sighed, thinking about how we're going to get out of here. "We'll get out, we have no choice," she said calmly. "We just need to be patient." I couldn't help but smile. That's truly wisdom that comes with age. In youth, any problem seems like a catastrophe. Diana must have sensed my mood and continued, "You know, Tom, I feel like you and Carol have drifted too far apart lately." "What do you mean?" I was surprised by this turn. "I see how you interact. No warmth, just reproaches and arguments. Is that how loving people should live?" I pondered. In some ways, Diana was right. Carol and I had indeed become strangers, mired in routine and household squabbles. Where had that spark gone, that attraction that had once brought us together? "So what do I do?" I asked quietly, looking up at the dark sky. "How do I bring back the old feelings?" "You need to learn to hear each other, to compromise, sometimes to put your partner's interest before your own. But most importantly, never forget what made you fall in love with each other." These words suddenly made my heart ache. Turning to Diana, I saw her face illuminated by the moonlight. It was so wise, so understanding, and unexpectedly beautiful. I was suddenly overwhelmed by a wave of tenderness for this woman. I don't know what came over me, but I leaned in and timidly touched her cheek with my lips. Diana froze. For a moment, I thought she was going to slap me, but instead, she suddenly pulled me to her and returned the kiss. Her lips were unexpectedly soft and responsive. It was like an electric shock running through my body, a heaviness settling in my lower abdomen. A single thought pounded in my head. "What are we doing? This is insane!" But I no longer had the strength to stop. Diana moaned softly as my hand slid under her sweater. All reason retreated before the avalanche of desire that surged over me. Passion, the likes of which I hadn't felt in many years, coursed through my veins like a searing flame. At some point, the pile of clothes was tossed aside, and our naked bodies entwined in a single rush. It was so beautiful, and at the same time so wrong that my head was spinning. All thoughts of Carol, of marital duty, evaporated as if they had never existed. There was only the call of the flesh, the unbridled thirst for possession. And judging by Diana's ardent reciprocal caresses, she felt the same way. I don't know how long it lasted. Time seemed to stand still. We lay pressed against each other, gazing up at the night sky. Our hearts were pounding as if they wanted to break out of our chests. Reality was gradually taking over, and euphoria was replaced by confusion and shame. What had we done? What now? But at the same time, I couldn't help but admit that for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. In the morning, we were awakened by voices and barking dogs. It was the search party sent by the resort administration. It turned out that Carol had contacted them by cell phone the night before and reported us missing. Luckily for Diana and me, she had slept soundly all night and had no idea what had happened. On the way back, Carol kept holding my hand and profusely thanking the rescuers. I responded absent-mindedly, immersed in painful reflections. Now, in the light of day, my nightly adventure with Diana seemed like something unreal, like a fevered dream. But one glance at my mother-in-law's flushed cheeks and shining eyes eloquently confirmed it had all been real. At the hotel, Diana and I carefully avoided each other. Carol, suspecting nothing, chattered about how glad she was that everything had ended well. I, on the other hand, couldn't find peace. I desperately wanted to talk to Diana, to discuss everything, but I was afraid we might be seen together. If only Carol wouldn't guess anything. The next day we were already getting ready to leave. Carol was busily packing suitcases, humming some tune. She was clearly in a great mood, looking forward to going home. I was beside myself. I was torn by conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I was burning with shame and guilt for what I had done. On the other, I couldn't get the hot memories of that night out of my head. Diana also looked pensive and detached. At breakfast, she hardly talked to anyone, only occasionally casting long, meaningful glances at me. It sent shivers down my spine and made my heart pound like crazy. Could it be that the attraction between us hadn't disappeared? Having already loaded the luggage into the car, I made up my mind. Seizing the moment when Carol went to the room for the last bag, I approached Diana. We needed to dot all the I's before we parted ways. "Listen, what happened? Let's just forget about it, okay?" As if it never happened, I mumbled, studiously looking away. "Forget?" Diana asked quietly and somewhat bitterly. "Is it possible to forget something like that? Tom, did you really feel nothing?" I froze as if struck by lightning. Her words seared me, forcing me to face the truth. Did I feel something? Oh, yes, I did. I suddenly realized with perfect clarity that I had fallen in love with my own mother-in-law, a woman old enough to be my mother. It was insane, but also the most wonderful truth in my life. Diana must have read the answer in my eyes. With a sad smile, she ran her palm over my cheek and whispered, "I feel the same way, Tom. Have for a long time. Ever since your wedding with Carol, I've looked at you and realized that only with a man like you could I find happiness. You are my soulmate." But what do we do now?" My head was spinning. I didn't know what to do with this unexpected and overwhelming feeling. Diana sighed. "I don't know, Tom, but we can't give in to temptation. Family is sacred. Carol must never find out." It was hard to argue with that. Her own daughter would always come first for Diana. And I myself understood that we couldn't destroy my marriage with Carol. One mistake wasn't worth a whole life. But God, how I wanted to tell everything to go to hell and just hold Diana close. At that moment, Carol appeared from the hotel doors. Diana and I jumped apart as if scorched. Putting on polite smiles, we got into the car. Carol chattered about what a great time we had and made plans for future trips. I just nodded mechanically while peering into the rearview mirror. Diana was sitting with her back turned to the window, crumpling a handkerchief in her hands. Could it be that she was crying? The whole way home, I felt like everything inside me was twisting into a tight knot. I faced a difficult choice. Would I be able to suppress my feelings and live as before? To pretend to be a loving husband and obedient son-in-law? Or would I throw everything away and take a risk, put my family's well-being on the line for the sake of a crazy impulse of the heart? Several weeks passed after that fateful vacation. Life returned to its usual course, but for me, everything had changed irrevocably. I kept thinking about Diana, mentally returning to our single night together. Compared to her, my relationship with Carol seemed bland and mundane, like a lettuce leaf next to a spicy chili pepper. I realized that this couldn't go on. My feelings for Diana were eating me up inside, giving me no peace. I had to make a decision, once and for all, to talk to my mother-in-law frankly, to discuss our future together. Was it even possible, this future? One evening I made up my mind. Waiting until Carol left for yoga, I got in the car and drove to Diana's house. The whole way, I kept turning over options for the upcoming conversation in my head. Confess my love, suggest running away together, or sensibly say goodbye and put this story out of my mind. Damn, I had never had such a hard time making a choice. Diana opened the door immediately, as if she had been waiting for me. She looked pale and haggard, shadows under her eyes. But when she saw me, her face lit up with such joy that it took my breath away. Could it be that I really meant that much to her? "Tom, what are you doing here?" she stammered, bewildered, letting me inside. Before I could change my mind, I blurted out, "Diana, I can't go on like this anymore. I can't pretend that nothing happened, that I don't love you. It's beyond my power." A stunned silence. For a few seconds, Diana stared at me as if she couldn't believe her ears, and then she threw herself on my neck, sobbing. "Tom, darling, I'm going crazy without you too. I thought I would die of longing. I need you. Do you hear me?" I crushed her in an embrace, buried my face in her hair. God, how long I had waited for this moment. Her warmth, her tenderness, her closeness. Our lips merged in a greedy kiss, in which joy, relief, and passion mingled. The whole world ceased to exist. There was only us. But reality quickly reminded us of itself. Tearing ourselves apart with difficulty, we looked into each other's eyes, realizing the full horror of the situation.
"What are we going to do, Tom?" Diana whispered. "We can't. You have a wife. I have a daughter."
"To hell with everything," I interrupted. "Yes, it's selfish. Yes, we won't be understood and will be condemned. But don't we deserve a little bit of happiness? I love you, Diana, and I don't give a damn about the consequences." For a moment, a shadow of doubt flickered in her eyes. But then Diana nodded resolutely. "You're right. Come what may, but I choose you. I choose us. We'll figure something out. We'll manage." I hugged her so tightly that bones cracked. It doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter how Carol will take it. The only thing that really matters is our love. We found each other, two halves of one whole, and now we'll be together, no matter what happens, against all odds. Of course, we have a difficult road ahead of us. Scandals, condemnation, rejection by society. But looking into Diana's shining eyes, I believe it's worth it. Our love is worth it. And we'll manage. We'll withstand any trials. Because there's no other way. Because we can't do it any other way anymore. We chose each other, once and for all. Sixth story. With each passing day, I felt an increasing emptiness in my life. Emma, my wife of 10 years, seemed more and more detached and emotionless. I remembered that spark in her eyes when she used to look at me, remembered the passion of our embraces. But lately, none of that remained. Our marriage was gradually turning into a routine. We lived by a schedule, everything measured and predictable. In the morning, we ate the same breakfast, then went to work. In the evening, we sat down for dinner together, watched some TV, and went to bed. No surprises, no intrigue, no excitement. In bed, there was also complete calm. Our infrequent lovemaking resembled mechanical motions without emotion or feeling. Where had that unbridled passion that once burned between us gone? All attempts to revive our relationship shattered against Emma's stony wall of detachment. I didn't know what was going on in her soul. We almost stopped talking. That's when I started visiting that club. The unwritten rule was to appear in masks and not reveal your identity. It added an air of mystery and excitement. Here, no one knew me. I could be anyone, behave however I wanted. At the club, I found the attention, interest, and flirtation that I so desperately lacked at home. My dull son-in-law image dissolved, and I immersed myself in a whirlpool of sweet dreams and carnal pleasures. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive again. My constant companion in this realm of night was a woman in a black lace mask. She was as enigmatic and seductive as I wanted to appear. A flirtatious romance swirled between us, filled with hints and passionate glances. One evening, sipping a cocktail, I confessed to my masked lover, "You know, at home no one understands me. My wife has drifted away, she's mired in routine, and has stopped appreciating me and our relationship." The stranger nodded and covered my hand with her cool palm. "Oh, I understand you perfectly, dear. At home it's sheer hell for me, too." Her voice was so soft and heartfelt that I wanted to lay my soul completely bare before her, and I told her all my fears, doubts, and disillusionment with marriage. The stranger listened without interrupting, nodding and caressing my fingers. "But I'm glad we can find refuge in this place. Here, no one knows who we are, and we can be ourselves," she smiled enigmatically. "It doesn't matter who we are out there. What matters is who we are to each other here." After that conversation, my secret affair with the woman in the mask only grew stronger. Our meetings became more frequent and longer. When I was with her, it seemed my whole life had finally regained meaning and vibrancy. I found what I so craved: understanding, attention, flirtation, passion. Of course, this situation couldn't last forever. One day, the moment had to come when the masks would fall off and the truth would come out. And that fateful moment struck completely unexpectedly. The night was sultry and hot, as always in the height of summer. Mesmerizing strippers writhed on stage, their feathered show illuminating the club with flashes of bright colors and light. And I sat at my favorite table, unable to take my eyes off the girl across from me. From our first meeting, the black lace mask on her face only fueled my curiosity. Who was this mysterious stranger who had bewitched me with her charm and understanding? The club was filled with an atmosphere of daring flirtation and unbridled revelry. Anonymity and permissiveness reigned here. It didn't matter who you were or where you came from, FBI agent or senator, stripper or housewife. Everyone donned masks, striving to break free from the routine of their ordinary lives. "Shall we drink?" my companion suggested, filling our glasses with sparkling champagne. I nodded, unable to tear my gaze away from her. The stranger was clad in a sumptuous evening gown the color of the night sky, greedily hugging her seductive curves. In the glare of the bright lights, her tanned skin looked velvety, and her eyes sparkled like two deep pools. "You're so quiet today," she threw me a mischievous glance. "Is something troubling you?" After taking a sip of champagne, I sighed deeply. Everything around seems so unreal, as if this is just a play, a game, and we're merely actors in masks. The woman across from me laughed, tossing her black locks back from her forehead. "Well, isn't that great?" Her words sounded so captivating that I involuntarily relaxed and smiled in response. The stranger caught my gaze, and something new flickered in her eyes, a strange mixture of longing and sadness. "You know, sometimes I want to tear off this mask, open up to you completely without holding anything back. What do you think? Could you accept me as I truly am?" Her question hung in the hot air, thick with the scents of sweat, alcohol, and perfume. Before I could answer, the stranger suddenly tore the mask from her face in one swift motion. I flinched and stared at her in disbelief. Before me sat my mother-in-law, Rosalind. Stunned, I gazed at her features, carefully concealed by the mask. Rosalind's eyes looked defiant, but I also noticed longing and despair in them. She wasn't hiding, wasn't joking. She had revealed her true self to me. "This is my real face, Michael," Rosalind said with a bitter smile. "Now you see who I really am. What do you say?" As if struck by thunder, I couldn't utter a word. Could it be that this whole time my secret lover was my own mother-in-law? This called everything into question, all our moments of intimacy and amorous longing. I took a ragged breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Chaos reigned in my head. Part of me was shocked and felt disgust, but another part rejoiced, for I had finally learned who that extraordinary stranger was who had bewitched me. Rosalind continued to look at me expectantly, no longer hiding anything. And in that moment it dawned on me. This woman had always lived beside me, but I hadn't noticed her. Blinded by the routine and boredom of my relationship with Emma, I had overlooked the soul of this passionate, life-filled individual. I reached out to my former secret lover and firmly squeezed her hand. "Rosalind, I never saw you, the real you. I missed so much." She smiled back uncertainly, and at that moment I clearly understood. Now that the masks were off, everything would change forever. There was no going back. How strange it felt to be in love with my own mother-in-law. This feeling just wouldn't fit in my head. Every time I pictured our intimate moments with Rosalind, my hair stood on end from the realization of incestuous sin. And there was indeed an excess of sin. After the carefully guarded masks fell, our bond only strengthened. Now we could be ourselves without concealment or limitations. At first, Rosalind was still shy, embarrassed by how everything had turned out. But I did everything to dispel her fears and complexes. In her company, I didn't have to play the role of the perfect son-in-law and family man. I could allow myself to be daring, uninhibited, a passionate lover. Soon, all shyness was left behind, and our affair took on a serious edge and sensuality. Rosalind transformed in my eyes, revealing herself as a passionate and fiery nature. In bed, she let loose completely, shedding all masks of propriety. One night, after another stormy night, she lay beside me, wrapped in a sheet. In the flickering light of the nightstand, I examined her body, noting every wrinkle, every hollow. Despite her age, Rosalind remained remarkably seductive. "What do you see?" she asked, noticing my studying gaze. "I see a beautiful woman, without any masks or screens." I planted a kiss on her neck, inhaling the sweet scent of her perfume. Rosalind giggled and playfully pulled away. "You deceive her. I'm an old wrinkled hag, full of flaws." "Flaws are just reminders of a life lived." I ran my palm along her cheek. "And they only make you more alluring." My mother-in-law gave me one of those looks that promised a passionate storm. Our bodies intertwined once more in loving embraces, without boundaries or prohibitions. Away from the walls of the club, out of sight of prying eyes, our relationship developed rapidly and unchecked. We uncovered sides of each other that we had kept tightly locked away from the rest of the world. Rosalind quenched her loneliness and unsatisfied thirst for passion, and I indulged fully after the enervating routine and boring marriage. We reveled in our secret affair, like wine from a forbidden cup. An intoxicating dizziness took hold of me at the mere sight of Rosalind. I basked in her attention and interest in me. In the evenings, I often had to twist and lie to Emma to justify my absence, but I did whatever it took to spend even a minute alone with my forbidden lover. With each passing day, our secret became more and more burdensome. Sooner or later, something had to happen, and it did on that fateful evening. "Darling, how about going to a new place tonight?" Emma called out to me from the doorway of the apartment as I was about to dash off to meet Rosalind again. "I heard a trendy new nightclub opened downtown. Everyone's talking about it." I froze in my tracks, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Anything but that club. "I don't really feel like it, dear," I mumbled, averting my gaze. "Oh, come on, let's have some fun," Emma persisted, enthusiasm bubbling up. "You need to get your mind off all these worries. An evening at the club will do us good." I frantically weighed my options for avoiding it. If Emma really dragged me to the club where I had been carrying on an affair with her mother, it would be the end. Rosalind would surely be there too. She always frequented that place in the evenings. "Okay, if you want, I'll go with you." I sighed in resignation, realizing I couldn't avoid it. But just for a little while. Emma beamed and impulsively pecked me on the cheek. The evening promised to be truly catastrophic. When we entered the club a couple of hours later, I immediately forgot how to breathe. Inside, it was noisy, crowded, and bright. Throngs of dolled-up patrons with cocktails in hand crowded the dance floor or loitered at the bar. Scantily clad strippers with made-up faces writhed on stage to pounding electronic music. I pushed my way through this swirl of nude bodies and smoke, acutely feeling a rising panic. What if Rosalind was here? No, she couldn't be. She would never. My fears were instantly dispelled when, in a far corner, I made out a familiar figure in a black lace dress. My breath caught in my throat. Rosalind! She leaned against the wall with a cocktail in her hand, her breasts clearly outlined under the thin fabric. "Honey, are you okay?" Emma called to me, following my gaze. "You look so pale." At that moment, Rosalind finally noticed me, and her mouth rounded in involuntary astonishment. Her eyes widened as she recognized Emma, her daughter, standing beside me. The world seemed to slow down, turning into a wavering, shimmering substance. An abyss yawned open around us, echoing with the thudding of my heart. Rosalind looked at me with pleading and growing horror, silently begging me to do something. But I was in a stupor myself, unable to move. How had I allowed this to happen? My affair with my mother-in-law, which I had hidden from my wife for months, was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. Finally, Emma followed my gaze, and her face too contorted with realization of who she was seeing. "Mom!" she gasped, dropping her glass on the floor. Shards scattered with a tinkling sound in all directions. In that second, I would have given anything to disappear through the floor. Fate had cruelly played a trick on me, bringing us all face to face without disguises or masks. Rosalind took a few steps toward us, her lips moving, but I couldn't make out the words. Emma, on the other hand, simply froze, looking. Between her mother and me, with a swiveling gaze, I saw how shattered trust and suspicion took hold of her. Emma's face contorted, as if she had been slashed with a knife. What's going on here?" she cried out in a faltering voice. I silently opened and closed my mouth, but the words escaped me. Rosalind, meanwhile, lowered her head, unable to meet her daughter's gaze. Suddenly, Emma turned and rushed for the exit, pushing past dancers and patrons in her way. Behind her shoulders remained only a trembling wave of heavy silence. Rosalind sank lifelessly onto the nearest chair and buried her face in her hands. And only then did I begin to realize the full horror of what had happened. Rosalind raised her tear-stained eyes to me. "Michael, how could this? What are we going to do now?" Her hands were trembling, and an expression of desperate anguish was frozen on her face. Streams of tears ran down her cheeks. I remained silent, unable to find the words. A rising wave of panic welled up inside me. It all happened so suddenly, in one fateful moment. The veil of secrecy fell away, and our bond with Rosalind stood exposed in all its vile nakedness. Emma saw everything. She understood and left, shattered, emptied, her world crumbling in an instant. And I became the one who destroyed it. My mind frantically grasped for justifications, for a way out, but whichever way I turned, I hit a dead end. I could have rushed to chase after Emma, fallen to my knees before her and begged for forgiveness. I could have said it was just a misunderstanding. a hallucination, a figment of a sick imagination. But what words could justify what she had seen with her own eyes? My relationship with Rosalind was an indisputable fact, or I could have fled from here, left everything as it was, and delivered Emma her bitter sentence. Pack my bags, file for divorce, and try to start a new life with Rosalind. But what kind of life would that be? It would be poisoned by shame and disgrace until the end of days. One way or another, Emma already knew, and her heart was shattered, splintered into pieces by the revelation that her husband and her own mother had become entangled in a sinful affair behind her back. Trust was lost forever. Any words of justification would look like pitiful, lying attempts. Rosalind continued to gaze at me silently, a mixture of hope and guilt in her eyes. I suddenly realized that she was waiting for me to make a decision about what to do with our little dirty secret that was bursting out in all its ugliness. Once again, I felt the weight of the burden on my shoulders, as I had on the first day I moved in with Rosalind. Back then, I was drowning in domestic routine and lack of prospects. Salvation came in the form of secret meetings with the stranger from the club, who I later learned was my mother-in-law. Our sinful bond became that breath of fresh air that helped me survive the dead mundanity. It helped me realize how deeply I had strayed in my search for passion, desperately clinging to anything that could save me. But now this salvation risked engulfing me completely, destroying everything I had left. Two paths loomed before me. One represented an abyss, dark and cavernous, where Rosalind's sweet embraces and my frenzied craving for the forbidden fruit irresistibly drew me. The other was a well-trodden rut, a return to what I had, albeit gray and joyless, but stable. I stared into Rosalind with a bottomless gaze. She attracted me with superhuman force, threatening to subjugate me completely. But I had to master myself, for the future, for the sake of all that was dear. "Rosalind, forgive me," I whispered with trembling lips. "Forgive me. We must stop, right now." I turned away, feeling the emptiness within every cell. It seemed as if I had guzzled down a potent poison, and now I was forced to discard my fatal addiction. Rosalind fell silent in response, no longer finding words. She lowered her head, accepting my verdict. I had chosen grayness and lies, and at the same time, I had ripped myself free from the prison of the forbidden. Where this new path would lead, and what I would find at its end was unclear. But I was firmly determined to walk it, leaving behind the abyss of sin and ruin. Anything to avoid complete destruction. Seventh story. My name is Michael, and the last few months of my life have been a real hell. It all started when my wife Emma and I lost our home due to financial difficulties. I worked as a sales manager, and Emma was a primary school teacher, but our income was barely enough to pay the bills and mortgage. When it became clear that we could no longer afford to live in our house, Emma suggested temporarily moving in with her mother, Linda, until we got back on our feet. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, as I never got along with Linda, but we had no choice. Linda's house was located in a quiet suburb, about an hour's drive from our previous residence. It was a typical American house with a white picket fence and a neatly trimmed lawn. Linda greeted us rather coldly, but agreed to take us in for an indefinite period. For the first few weeks, Emma and I were settling into our new place and looking for ways to improve our financial situation. I tried to find part-time work in my spare time, and Emma gave private lessons. We hardly saw each other or Linda, who spent most of her time in her room. One evening, when Emma went to another lesson, Linda unexpectedly invited me to her room. I was surprised, but followed her, thinking she wanted to discuss some household issues. However, the conversation took a completely different turn. "Michael, I know that you and Emma are going through a tough time right now," Linda began, looking at me intently. "But I'm not only concerned about your financial situation, I accidentally found out that you have a problem with gambling." I felt the blood drain from my face. How could she have known about my addiction to playing at the casino? I had carefully hidden it from Emma, fearing that she would leave me if she found out the truth. "I don't know what you're talking about," I mumbled, looking away. "Don't pretend, Michael. I've seen statements from your bank account and know that you regularly lose large sums of money. If Emma finds out about this, she will be devastated." I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked at Linda. There was no judgment in her eyes, only cold calculation. "What do you want?" I asked, feeling cornered. "I want you to do what I say," Linda replied, smiling. "Otherwise, your wife will find out about your dirty little secret." From that day on, my life turned into a nightmare. Linda began to regularly summon me to her room and demand that I carry out various errands. At first, they were small household tasks like going to the store or fixing a leaky faucet. But gradually, her demands became increasingly strange and unacceptable. One day she made me give her a foot massage and then a full-body massage. I felt humiliated and scared but couldn't refuse, fearing that she would tell Emma about my gambling addiction. Gradually, our meetings became more frequent and intimate. Linda openly flirted with me, made suggestive comments, and touched me at every opportunity. I hated myself for the way my body responded to her touch, but I couldn't help it. A strange, painful attraction developed between us that I couldn't explain.
One evening, when Emma went to a teacher's conference, Linda came to my room wearing only a robe. She sat next to me on the bed and started kissing my neck. I tried to push her away, but she just laughed and started undressing me.
That night, we had sex, rough, desperate, almost animalistic. I felt both disgusted with myself and a wild, unbridled desire. Linda took everything she wanted from me, and I couldn't refuse her, afraid of losing Emma and our marriage. From then on, my relationship with Linda became even more tangled and painful. We continued to meet secretly, making love in her bedroom while Emma was at work. I felt like I was being pulled into a dark whirlpool with no way out.
I tried to end our meetings, telling Linda that I couldn't live like this anymore. But she just laughed in my face and reminded me of my gambling debts. I was trapped, forced to fulfill my mother-in-law's every whim and cheat on the wife I still loved.
Emma began to notice that something was wrong with me. I became nervous, distracted, avoided her touch, and flinched at every sound. She tried to talk to me, to find out what was bothering me, but I just remained silent and avoided the conversation. Our home turned into a battlefield filled with heavy silence and unspoken grievances. Emma and I almost stopped communicating, and Linda watched us with a smug smile, as if enjoying our suffering. I felt like I was going crazy. I wanted to scream, to run away, just to escape from this hell. But I continued to play my role, afraid of losing the last remnants of my life. The denouement came suddenly and cruelly. One evening when I was at work, Emma came home earlier than usual and caught Linda and me in bed. I will never forget the look on her face: shock, pain, disgust, and endless disappointment. Emma screamed, throwing whatever was at hand at us. Linda just laughed and started insulting her daughter, accusing her of not being good enough for her husband. I tried to calm Emma down, to explain to her that it was all one big misunderstanding, but she didn't want to listen. Eventually, Emma ran out of the house, crying and cursing us both. I ran after her, begging her to forgive me and give me another chance, but she just shook her head and said she was filing for divorce. I watched her walk away, feeling my life falling apart. The next few weeks passed in a haze. Emma filed for divorce and moved in with her friend. I continued to live in Linda's house, but we no longer spoke or touched each other. She had achieved her goal, destroying my marriage and my life. A month later, I packed my things and left that damned house. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town and immersed myself in work, trying to forget about my past. Sometimes I think about Emma and our happy days together, but then my thoughts return to Linda and our dirty secret. I know that I am to blame for what happened. I should have told Emma the truth about my gambling addiction and asked for her help, but instead, I allowed Linda to manipulate me and destroy everything that was dear to me. Now I live alone, trying to atone for my sins and start a new life, but memories of the past haunt me, giving me no peace, and I know that I will never be able to fully rid myself of the guilt and shame for what I have done. That's the story that happened to me, a story of weakness, betrayal, and the destructive power of secrets. I hope that someday I can atone for my sins and regain the respect of those around me. But for now, I'm just trying to survive and not go crazy from the burden of the past. 8th story. I, Jason, have been behind the wheel for several hours now, and fatigue is starting to take its toll. My mother-in-law, Elizabeth, is sitting next to me in the passenger seat, dozing off. We decided to visit her sister who lives in a neighboring state, and I volunteered to give Elizabeth a ride so she wouldn't have to travel alone. The road winds through picturesque mountains and forests, but I'm too focused on driving to enjoy the scenery. Suddenly, there's a strange sound, and the car starts to swerve. Damn, looks like we have a flat tire. Jason, what happened? Elizabeth asks, alarmed, waking up from the jolt. Don't worry, Elizabeth. I think we have a puncture. I'll stop and check it out. I carefully slow down and pull over to the side of the road. We find ourselves in the middle of nowhere, not a soul around. I examine the tires. Yep, the right rear is flat. We have a spare, but as luck would have it, the jack is nowhere to be found. I try to get a cell signal, but to no avail. So we're stuck, Elizabeth asks gloomily, getting out of the car. Looks like it. No signal. Can't change the tire. I'll try to flag down a ride. Maybe someone can take us to the nearest service station. After half an hour of unsuccessful attempts to stop the rare passing cars, I plop back into the driver's seat, frustrated. Elizabeth sighs wearily. Well, I guess we'll have to wait until someone decides to help us. Yeah, I really don't feel like changing our evening plans. Okay, let's kill some time. The sun is gradually setting, and Elizabeth and I are still sitting in the stranded car in the middle of the Colorado mountains. No help is in sight. All topics for small talk have been exhausted, and an awkward silence hangs in the air. Tell me, Jason, how are you and Katie doing? Elizabeth suddenly asks. I hope you're taking good care of my little girl. Of course, Elizabeth, we get along great, I reply with a smile, a little surprised by the question. We're in perfect harmony. Oh, I'm glad. You know, Henry and I had our ups and downs in our married life, but now I can't even remember the last time we were truly close. Elizabeth becomes pensive, and I don't know what to say. Is she really complaining to me about her husband, my father-in-law? What a twist! I understand. Relationships are complicated, I say after a pause. Katie and I argue over little things sometimes too, but we try to find compromises. And you're doing the right thing. Cherish what you have, Jason. It's not that I don't love Henry, but the spark between us faded long ago. I nod, not sure how to respond to such revelations. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continues, and to think that he used to drive me crazy. That mysterious smile of his, the mischievous squint, the strong embrace. Ah, youth. I feel awkward listening to this, as if I'm intruding on something intimate. But Elizabeth seems to just need to vent. Okay, I think I've gotten a bit too frank, she catches herself. Sorry for dumping all this on you. It's just that for some reason it's easy to talk to you, Jason. Come on, Elizabeth, I'm always ready to chat and lend support. I smile, trying to diffuse the tension. Gradually, the tension dissipates, and we spend a long time talking about everything under the sun, sharing our innermost thoughts. Who would have thought that this unfortunate trip would turn into heart-to-heart conversations with my mother-in-law? It's completely dark now. The interior of the car is in semi-darkness. We're tired of talking and sit silently, each lost in our own thoughts. Suddenly, I notice that Elizabeth is looking at me in a strange way. There's something new in her gaze that I haven't seen before. Sadness or desire. Jason, can I ask you something? She says quietly. Sure, Elizabeth, go ahead, I reply, wondering what it is this time. Do you still think I'm beautiful? You know, for my age? The question catches me off guard. What is she getting at? Coughing in embarrassment, I stammer, well, yeah, why do you ask? You're a very attractive woman. Just wanted to make sure I can still appeal to men. Elizabeth smiles enigmatically. Thanks for the compliment. She scoots a little closer, and a wave of her delicate perfume washes over me. Damn, why did it suddenly get so hot? I try to distract myself, but I can't take my eyes off her deep cleavage. You know, I once thought you had a little crush on me, Elizabeth whispers, leaning close to my ear. Even before you and Katie got married. My hair stands on end. What is she saying? Yes, I admit, at first I found Elizabeth attractive, but she's my wife's mother. Elizabeth, I think we'd better change the subject, I manage, feeling the blood rush to my face. Why? Aren't you curious what would have happened if... I don't let her finish. I don't know what came over me, but I press my lips to Elizabeth's in a passionate kiss. She freezes for a moment, but immediately responds with fervent ardor. Consciousness drifts away, reason shuts down, leaving only primal instincts. Clothes fly to the floor, revealing heated bodies. We entwine in a mad dance of passion right there, in the cramped interior of the car stranded in the middle of the mountains. It's so wrong, but it feels so damn good. Only after some time, when lust gives way to sated satisfaction, do I begin to realize the full horror of what has happened. God, what have we done? We're relatives, members of the same family. How could I sink so low as to sleep with my own mother-in-law? Judging by the shocked expression on Elizabeth's face, she's tormented by the same thoughts. This madness needs to stop immediately and never be repeated. Jason, we shouldn't have done that, Elizabeth whispers, hastily putting her clothes back on. God, what's going to happen now? Calm down, Elizabeth. Let's not panic. I'm ready to die of shame myself, but I try to keep my composure. We'll just pretend nothing happened. Easier said than done. But how can we look Henry and Katie in the eye? We've betrayed them. I know it's terrible, but what else can we do? We can't confess everything. It will destroy our family. Elizabeth nods convulsively, tears streaming down her cheeks. It pains me to see her like this, but I understand that I must be strong for both of us. Listen, what happened between us was a monstrous mistake, a momentary lapse of reason, nothing more. We just need to forget about it and move on. You're right, Jason. Let's pretend this night never happened, for the sake of preserving our family. We seal our agreement with a long look full of bitterness and regret. We vow never, ever to reveal our shameful secret. No matter what happens, we will take this sin to our graves. The next morning, we finally manage to flag down a passing pickup truck and make it to the nearest auto repair shop. The entire time the mechanics are fiddling with the wheel, Elizabeth and I barely speak and avoid looking at each other. When the car is finally fixed, we continue on our way. The atmosphere in the car is oppressive, but we both try to act as if everything is fine. From time to time, I catch Elizabeth's tense glances, but immediately look away. The parting with Katie is strained. She senses that something is wrong and keeps asking if anything happened on the road. Elizabeth and I cheerfully assure her that everything is fine, just some minor technical issues. It happens to everyone. Back home, I immerse myself in routine, trying to drown out the unbidden memories. Work, home, work again. Only sometimes, on dark, lonely nights, echoes of the forbidden pleasure overtake me, making me wake up in a cold sweat. My family life with Katie goes on as usual, but something changes imperceptibly. Now, every time I make love to my wife, I can't shake off thoughts of Elizabeth. Her soft skin, passionate kisses, ardent embraces. I hate myself for being spineless, but I can't help it. That fateful night in the Colorado mountains poisoned my soul with the sweet venom of sinful passion. I continue to live as usual, keeping the shameful secret, but I know that nothing will ever be the same. Elizabeth tries not to cross paths with me unnecessarily, but when it does happen, the exchange of meaningful, heavy glances speaks louder than words. We are forever bound by the invisible ties of sin. All that remains is to pray that the truth doesn't come out. Gritting my teeth, I carry my cross onward, keeping silent. After all, everyone has skeletons in their closet, right? And mine will now forever smolder in the far, dark corner, reminding me of past mistakes, but life no matter what goes on. What? Ninth story. My wife Charlotte is an amazing woman. Beautiful, smart, successful, and today is her 30th birthday. I still can't believe this incredible woman chose me, a simple guy from Brooklyn. We decided to celebrate at a fancy restaurant in Manhattan. Charlotte invited all her family and close friends. Of course, her mother, Catherine, was there, a statuesque, elegant woman who, despite her age, attracted the attention of men. Today, she came with her new boyfriend, Paul, who is about my age. I wonder where she finds them. The evening went on as usual. The guests congratulated Charlotte, made toasts, had fun. I tried to be an attentive husband, pouring my wife champagne, joking, dancing with her. But out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that Catherine throws at me strange, almost inviting looks. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was imagining things. Toward the end of the evening, when the guests were already quite cheerful from alcohol, I decided to go to the bathroom for a while. The restaurant was expensive, so the restrooms here were at the highest level, clean, spacious, even had a small sofa. I went into one of the stalls and locked the door behind me. Or did I just think I did? No sooner had I unzipped my fly than the door swung open noisily, and Catherine literally fell into the stall. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glistening feverishly. She was obviously very drunk. "Paul, I missed you so much," she whispered, wrapping her arms around my neck and kissing me passionately on the lips. I didn't even realize what was happening right away. But when I realized that my mother-in-law had just mistaken me for her beau, it was too late. Her tongue insistently explored my mouth, her hands roamed my body, unmistakably finding the sensitive spots. Damn, this woman knew exactly how to drive a man crazy. My brain was desperately sending out alarm signals. "Stop! This is wrong! This is your wife's mother!" But my body treacherously responded to Catherine's caresses. After all, I'm just a man, and she is a gorgeous woman, now almost lying in my arms. Whatever will be, I thought to myself. After all, Catherine had seduced me herself, and it is unlikely that she will remember it tomorrow. So why not give in to passion? Why not taste the forbidden fruit? I picked up my mother-in-law, sat her on the edge of the sink, and began to kiss her, assertively, almost roughly. She responded eagerly, moaning into my mouth. Our clothes flew to the floor, our hands exploring our naked bodies. Catherine was not what I had imagined her to be, delicate and fragile. No, she was passionate, insatiable, almost insane in her desire. We made love quickly, almost roughly, for fear of being caught, but that only made the pleasure sharper. Catherine bit her lips, holding back moans, scratching my back. Then she arched up, cried out, and collapsed in my arms. When the euphoria wore off, I realized what had happened. God, what had I done? I had just slept with my wife's mother, in a restaurant bathroom, at Charlotte's anniversary party. Isn't that the height of cynicism and fallenness? Catherine clearly didn't realize the reality of what was happening. She continued to smile happily and mumble, "Paul, honey, that was wonderful." But I was slowly beginning to realize what a mistake I had made. I shouldn't have given in to Catherine's provocation, even if she had mistaken me for her lover. It was dishonorable to Charlotte. It was mean to Paul. It was disgusting to myself. But you can't undo what you've done. The only thing to do was to try and keep it a secret. Charlotte must never find out. It would break her heart, destroy our family. And Catherine. From the looks of it, Catherine's not likely to remember anything in the morning. So my sin stays with me. A heavy burden on my conscience, but mine alone. The festivities came to an end. The guests went home staggering and hiccuping. Charlotte was glowing with happiness, thanking everyone for their congratulations. My wife, so beautiful, so unsuspecting. How could I do such a despicable thing to her? I noticed that Paul left alone. Apparently, he and Catherine had a falling out before my bathroom adventure. Well, at least I wasn't the cause of their spat, but who cares anymore? The next day, Charlotte told me that Paul had dumped Catherine, said she'd behaved inappropriately, and he never wanted to see her again. Poor Catherine sobbed and swore she'd done nothing wrong. Of course she did. She didn't remember anything. I listened to my wife and nodded sympathetically. But inside me, everything was turning upside down with shame and self-loathing. I wanted to forget what had happened, like a terrible dream. But I knew I couldn't. This memory would stay with me forever. I wonder how many more of these fatal mistakes will happen in my life. How many more times would I stumble, fail to resist temptation? I didn't know the answer. I could only hope that that crazy night was the last, that my love for Charlotte, for our family, would be stronger than any temptation. And Catherine. Well, that episode will remain a mystery to her. An unexplained reason for breaking up with Paul, one of many drunken adventures. I even felt a little sorry for her. But only a little. After all, she was the one who'd ignited that criminal fire in me. And now, I had to live with a seared conscience. That's a cautionary tale. Sounds like the plot of a bad movie, doesn't it? But, as you know, life is sometimes more unpredictable than the most twisted movie script. 10th story. It was Saturday, and our family decided to go on a picnic in the woods. We had all been planning this for a long time. My wife, Sarah, our children, Josh and Emma, and Sarah's parents, Jane and Henry. The day promised to be wonderful, warm but not hot, with a light, refreshing breeze. We arrived at the spot around noon and settled in a picturesque glade surrounded by tall pines and oaks. Sarah and Jane began laying out containers of food on the blanket, while Henry, the kids, and I decided to explore the surroundings. While Josh and Emma were running between the trees playing tag, Henry and I strolled unhurriedly along the edge of the glade, chatting leisurely. Despite the age difference, we always got along well and found topics to discuss. Soon we were called to lunch. Sitting on the blanket, we passed each other plates filled with delicious homemade food. Sandwiches, salads, fruits. Everyone was joking, laughing, and breathing in the fresh forest air. The atmosphere was truly familial and heartfelt. After a hearty lunch, someone suggested taking a short walk to the river flowing nearby. Henry, Sarah, and the children gladly agreed, while Jane and I volunteered to gather firewood for the evening bonfire in the meantime. As the others were getting ready, Jane gave me a strange, almost flirtatious look and said, "Well, Brian, ready to work with me as a team?" I was slightly taken aback by her tone, but nodded and smiled back. After all, what's wrong with a little joint walk? Having divided the tasks, our group split up. Sarah pecked me on the cheek goodbye and left with the children and Henry towards the river, while Jane and I headed into the woods. I couldn't shake off the feeling of some barely perceptible tension between us, although I attributed it to my imagination playing tricks on me. As we delved deeper into the thicket, the voices of the others gradually faded, and we were surrounded by a dense, almost ringing silence. Only occasionally was it broken by a distant woodpecker's tapping or the rustle of wind in the treetops. Jane and I walked side by side, occasionally bending down to pick up a suitable branch for the fire. At some point, Jane suggested sitting on a fallen tree and taking a break. I agreed. We settled on the rough trunk, leaning back on our elbows and turning our faces to the warm rays breaking through the thick foliage. And for some reason, it was at that moment that I suddenly became acutely aware that Jane and I were completely alone in the middle of the wild forest. This realization was strangely exciting and alarming at the same time. "Don't you think it's unfair?" Jane suddenly asked, looking thoughtfully into the distance. I turned to her, surprised by the sudden change of tone. Just a moment ago, we were casually chatting about some trifles, and now— "What exactly?" I asked cautiously. Jane gave a mirthless chuckle. "This whole life. Look at me. I'm over 50, and what do I see looking back? A marriage with no spark left, a job that brings no joy, dreams that will never come true." I was silent, stunned by her sudden frankness. In all the years we had known each other, Jane had never shared anything so personal with me, and she certainly had never complained about her life. From the outside, she and Henry had always seemed like a model-happy couple. "And you, Brian?" she continued, looking me straight in the eye. "You're unhappy too, I can see it. Trapped in a routine marriage, a job you're sick of, unfulfilled ambitions. Is this the life you dreamed of?" I felt something stir in my chest. Jane's words struck a chord with me. I really wasn't completely happy, even though I tried to convince myself otherwise. But to admit it out loud, and to my mother-in-law of all people, it seemed unthinkable. "Jane, listen," I began, trying to find the right words. "Maybe my life isn't perfect, but I have a family, children. Isn't that enough?" My mother-in-law just shook her head. "Family, duty, obligations. All of this is important, of course. But believe me, when you get to my age, you'll understand that you've missed out on something very, very important in life." She fell silent for a moment, then added more quietly, "Do you think we have a chance to fix it? To remember what it's like to live life to the fullest, to burn, to feel alive?" These words sent shivers down my spine. They sounded too ambiguous. Or was it just my imagination? I stole a glance at Jane and was struck by how beautiful and almost youthful she suddenly seemed to me. Her eyes were shining, her cheeks were flushed with a slight blush, either from excitement or from the forest air. For one crazy moment, I wanted to touch her face, to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The spell was broken as suddenly as it had come over me. I looked away, feeling my face flush with shame. God, what am I thinking? Beside me sits my wife's mother, and here I am imagining, "No, I need to get a grip." "Jane, I think we better get back to the others," I croaked. "They must be waiting for us by now." She nodded and got up from the trunk, brushing off her jeans, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Though perhaps it was just my imagination. Why would it be there? We continued our way through the forest, but now I consciously kept a little distance, no longer risking to start personal conversations. However, Jane's words kept running through my head. Is it really possible to change something? To experience something new, exciting, maybe even forbidden in life? The very thought of it strangely stirred my blood. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon when we returned to the camp, dumping armfuls of firewood by the future fire pit. Sarah and Henry, seeing us, smiled. Apparently, they were so engrossed in playing with the children that they didn't even notice our long absence. "Well, ready to start a fire?" Henry asked cheerfully, approaching us. "It should make for a glorious flame." How I wished I could share his cheerfulness at that moment. But my thoughts were still wandering somewhere else, and Jane looked strangely subdued. She was helping Sarah set the table, but kept getting lost in thought and freezing, staring at one spot. Our eyes crossed a couple of times, and each time it was as if an electric charge ran through my skin. What the hell are we doing? It wasn't long ago that we were just relatives, getting along but nothing more. And now? I was even afraid to think this thought through to the end. The prospects that were opening up seemed too frightening and alluring. The evening was in full swing. We sat around the merrily crackling fire, toasting marshmallows on sticks and sipping hot tea that Sarah had brought in a thermos. The children were already starting to nod off, tired from running around in the fresh air all day. Josh snuggled up beside me, and Emma curled up comfortably on Henry's lap. The adults were talking unhurriedly, sharing memories from their youth and funny stories. A pleasant warmth was spreading through my body, whether from the fire or from the heartfelt atmosphere. However, I couldn't fully relax. My thoughts were still occupied by Jane and our strange, disturbing conversation in the woods. My mother-in-law was sitting across from me on the other side of the fire, close, yet so torturously far away. The reflections of the flames danced on her face, making the shadows under her cheekbones move in an intricate pattern. A few strands had escaped from her casual bun, framing her face with copper curls. Jane was smiling in response to someone's joke, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. And I knew why. Our eyes met over the fire. In Jane's squinting green eyes, something wild flared up, something beyond control. Or did I just want to think it was the reflections of the flames? No, this time I wasn't mistaken. Jane was looking directly at me, and there wasn't a hint of familial feeling in that gaze, only scorching, undisguised desire. The blood roared in my ears. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone would hear it in a moment. I tried to look away, but couldn't. It was beyond my power. As if some invisible force was pulling me toward Jane, not letting me break free. "Brian, honey, are you all right?" Sarah's concerned voice broke into my thoughts, making me flinch. "You look a little pale." I shook my head, trying to come to my senses. "Yeah, I'm fine. I guess I'm just tired from the day. I'll go for a little walk, get some air." Carefully placing the dozing Josh on the blanket, I got up and, without looking at anyone, walked away from the camp. I needed to be alone, to sort out the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Having walked a fair distance, I stopped by a large, spreading oak tree and leaned my back against the rough trunk, throwing my head back to the star-studded sky. The cool night air cooled my burning cheeks a little, but it didn't bring the desired relief. My whole being was still in the grip of a strange, painful excitement. My mind understood that something wrong, unacceptable was happening. But my heart was desperately yearning to give in to temptation, to allow myself something I had never dared to think of before. A loud crack of a twig behind me made me turn around. A few steps away from me stood Jane, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the trees lit by the fire. Even without seeing her face, I knew she was smiling, so predatory and inviting that my mouth went dry. "Decided to run away from me?" she asked in a half-whisper, slowly approaching. I swallowed, feeling my knees treacherously weaken. "Jane, we shouldn't, this is wrong." She came right up to me, almost touching my chest. She smelled of a bonfire, something tart and exciting. I knew that smell. It's the smell of arousal. "Wrong," she breathed, looking up at me. "What in this world is right, Brian? To be unhappy all your life, just to meet someone's expectations? To deny yourself the last chance at a real feeling?" With those words, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to mine. And I was lost. All good intentions, All arguments of reason vanished at once, giving way to a primal, wild desire. I wrapped my arms around Jane's waist, pulling her to me, and responded to the kiss, greedily, frantically, as if my life depended on it. Our tongues entwined in a mad dance, hands exploring each other's bodies, slipping under clothes. The remnants of self-control were melting away with each second, giving way to all-consuming passion. It was such an acute, transcendent sensation that my head was spinning. With neither Sarah nor other women had I ever experienced anything like it. But somewhere on the edge of consciousness, there was still a tiny spark of sanity. With the last of my strength, I forced myself to break away from Jane's lips and exhale convulsively. "Wait, we can't! Not here! What if someone sees—" She nodded and, grabbing my hand, pulled me even deeper into the woods. We were almost running, stumbling over roots, and not looking where we were going. There was only one thought pounding in my head. Hurry, hurry to find a place where we could be alone, where no one would interfere with us finishing what we started. We stopped in a small clearing surrounded on all sides by dense undergrowth. No reflections of the fire or voices reached here. It seemed that the whole world had ceased to exist. There were only the two of us left. Jane turned to me and in one motion pulled her t-shirt over her head. For a moment I froze, mesmerized by the sight that opened up. In the moonlight, her skin seemed porcelain, almost glowing, and her breasts heaved invitingly in the lace cups of her bra. Seeing the expression on my face, Jane smiled predatorily and began to slowly unbutton her jeans. At that moment, it was as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over me. What the hell am I doing? I'm a married man. I have 2 children and a loving wife who is waiting for me there by the fire. How can I do this to them? To myself? "Jane, stop!" I croaked, recoiling. "We can't. This is wrong. I love Sarah and I can't cheat on her." A flash of annoyance crossed my mother-in-law's face, immediately replaced by determination. She leaned forward, almost touching me with her bare chest. "Brian, we both know your marriage is a sham," she whispered, searing my ear with her hot breath. "And if you really didn't want this, you would have left back there by the fire. But you're here because you want me as much as I want you." With those words, she ran her hand down my jeans. A strangled groan escaped my throat. My body was treacherously responding to her touch, even if my mind was still trying to resist. "Stop fighting with yourself, Brian," Jane continued to tempt me, covering my neck with wet kisses. "Just let go. Allow yourself to enjoy the moment. I've wanted this for so long, since our first meeting." This confession made me see stars. How? Had Jane really desired me all these years, while I considered our relationship purely familial? This thought strangely inflamed me even more. The familiar feeling of guilt was still there, but now it was mixed with something new. Vanity, pride, a dark exultation. I had managed, without knowing it, to awaken a fire of passion in this beautiful, confident woman. And at that moment, I stopped resisting. To hell with morality. To hell with prohibitions and attitudes. Now there were only our entwined bodies and the insane, transcendent pleasure spreading through my veins. We collapsed onto the soft carpet of grass and fallen leaves, hurriedly ridding ourselves of the rest of our clothes. The sensation of Jane's bare skin under my fingers was incomparable to anything. Silky, hot. It seemed to melt from my touch, responding with moans and sobs. I explored every curve of her body with my lips, trying to remember, to absorb this moment of madness. When our bodies finally joined in the rhythm as old as the world, reality finally faded into the background. There were only us, moving in unison, flowing into each other, forgetting everything in the world. At some point, the pleasure became almost unbearable, and I spilled into Jane with a drawn-out groan, feeling her body shudder in ecstasy too. We lay on the cool ground, limbs intertwined, trying to catch our breath. The realization of what we had done was slowly but inexorably seeping into my fogged consciousness. God, what have I done? How will I look Sarah in the eye now? How will I live with this burden of guilt and shame? Jane, as if sensing my thoughts, stroked my cheek and whispered, "Don't punish yourself, darling. What happened is not a mistake. It's a gift of fate, a chance to feel truly alive. Let's just accept it and be grateful." Oh, how I wanted to believe her, to forget about the consequences, to just dissolve in her embrace and never return to my former life. But I couldn't. Somewhere out there, beyond this clearing, my family was waiting for me. And I had to go back to them, no matter how hard it was. The way back to camp seemed endless. Jane and I walked in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. Her face had a dreamy, slightly detached expression, while I felt as if I was being torn in two. Part of me was still there, in the moonlit clearing, lost in sensations, intoxicated by passion. The other part was feverishly calculating every step, trying to figure out how to hide the traces of what had happened and pretend that everything was fine. When the glow of the fire loomed ahead, Jane stopped and, turning to me, whispered, "Brian, no matter what happens next, I don't regret anything. But I understand that you need time to think it all over. Let's just keep our secret and try to act as if nothing happened." I nodded, feeling a lump rising in my throat. Words of gratitude and repentance were bursting out, but I held them back with an effort of will. Now I needed to focus on not giving myself away in any way. Taking a deep breath and putting on the most carefree expression I could muster, I followed Jane out into the glade. Sarah and Henry were sitting by the dying fire, talking quietly about something. The children were already sound asleep, wrapped in blankets. "And here are our lost ones," Sarah smiled, noticing us. "Where have you two been for so long?" My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to smile back casually. "Oh, just walking through the woods, admiring the stars. Jane decided to look for some night flowers to photograph, and I went along for company." It was almost the truth. During our mad dash through the forest, I did notice Jane snapping some glowing plants in the dark. Apparently, she still hadn't completely lost her head, unlike me. Sarah nodded, satisfied with the explanation, but Henry gave us a strange look. However, he immediately smiled and patted the spot next to him. "Come here, stargazer, tell Sarah and me what constellations you spotted." For the next half hour, we had a peaceful conversation on neutral topics, occasionally glancing at the sleeping children. Jane was surprisingly natural. She laughed at Henry's jokes, passed out cookies to everyone, shared her impressions of the forest. Looking at her, I began to calm down too. Maybe we really can keep what happened a secret and go on living as if nothing had happened. When the fire finally died down and even the embers stopped smoldering, we began to pack up to go home. I carefully picked up the sleeping Josh in my arms, and Henry, despite Sarah's objections, hoisted the drowsy Emma onto his shoulder. The string of our silhouettes slowly dissolved into the thickening dusk, leaving behind the place that had irrevocably changed my life. All the way back and in the following days, I tried my best to act as if everything was normal. I smiled, joked, went about my usual business. However, inside me, a hurricane of conflicting emotions was still raging. Shame, guilt, fear of exposure, and at the same time some desperate, painful exultation. As if by succumbing to the forbidden passion, I had gained some kind of perverted freedom. Jane and I really almost stopped communicating after that incident in the woods. When we met, we tried to be pointedly friendly and not betray our true feelings with a single word or gesture. Even alone, having waited for the right moment, we only exchanged meaningful, wistful glances and then looked away. Life seemed to have returned to its usual course, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. That night had changed me forever, and my attitude toward myself. I was no longer an exemplary husband and son-in-law. I had become a liar and a traitor. And although outwardly everything looked the same as before, I carried this bitter truth within me like a festering wound. Sometimes, in moments of weakness, I wondered, what if I still gave in to temptation after all? To hell with morality, leave my tired life and run away with Jane wherever my eyes looked, start everything from scratch, finally give free rein to my true feelings? But every time something stopped me, duty, responsibility, unwillingness to destroy the lives of my loved ones, I don't know. So I lived, torn between the desirable and the real. Who knows, maybe one day I'll have the courage to take that step. Or maybe my feelings will cool down and I'll learn to live with my guilt. Right now, I'm not ready to make any predictions. I can only say that that night in the woods was a kind of point of no return for me. I crossed the line that separates fantasy from reality, and I can never be the same again. Of course, I realize what I did was disgusting to Sarah and our family. Maybe someday this secret will come out and I'll have to pay for my sin in full. Or maybe I'll have to confess it all myself. For now, I can only live one day at a time, trying to be a good husband and father. and at the same time secretly cherishing the memories of the passion I had experienced. Because in the end, we all have our own skeletons in the closet and our own forbidden desires. And sometimes it can be so hard to fight temptation, especially when it comes in the form of a woman as alluring as Jane. Did you like this stories? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.